Well, again, thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy days to join me and hear some information about financial aid and get some of your questions answered. So we'll have a Q&A section at the end of the presentation. You can type in your questions into the question and answer tool in your Zoom bar, and we'll get to as many as we can. So thanks. I'm going to work from a PowerPoint presentation. So here we go. Okay. So we've got, or I have 5 sections to this presentation. I'm going to be happy to talk about general financial aid terms and principles, give you an overview, focus a bit of the presentation on the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, which all domestic students, U.S. citizens, and not permanent residents of the United States would need to complete. The CSS profile, which is the form required to be considered for Skidmore grant assistance from all international students and U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens. Then I'll review how it is we determine financial need of families, how we put together financial aid awards, and then leave some time at the end for your questions and hopefully answers. So I always like to start with this overview when I'm talking to families and students about financial aid. So what is financial aid? Financial aid, really just simply put, are funds provided to students to help them afford and pay for their college expenses. Financial aid can be put into one of these 3 categories. It can be gift aid, it can be loan aid, or it can be work aid. So gift aid is probably what most people think about when they hear the term financial aid. It's grants and scholarships. It's money given to the student to help them pay for their expenses, their higher education expenses. It's money that's not repaid. And it's the best kind of financial aid that a student can receive. But in addition to this gift type of financial aid, there are 2 other types. Loan aid, which is money that the student or parent borrows to help finance their educational expenses. So even though they are loans, and you can think of a loan as a loan, whether it's a student loan or any other kind of loan, it's money that needs to be repaid. The only reason the government lends money to students is because they're enrolled in college. And so this criteria that they have to be enrolled in college is what makes it part of the group of financial aid. So it's a type of funds that are available to students to help them afford education. And then there's work aid. Work aid is just a part-time job on a campus. A student earns funds just like any other part-time job. It's partially funded by the federal government for students who demonstrate need while they're attending college, and that's why it's considered under the financial aid umbrella. I'm going to review this chart with you of the main types of government assistance that are available to students. But I don't want you to worry about having to memorize the criteria or these terms, but being familiar with them is a good idea. But it's the financial aid administrators, people like me that work in the financial aid office at colleges that are responsible for reviewing your financial aid application, determining what kinds of government grants and other kinds of financial aid you qualify for, and then advising you of your eligibility on what's called a financial aid award letter if the student is admitted to our college. So that's the big picture of how it works. And let me talk a little bit about some of these financial aid awards. The first one on the list is called the Federal Pell Grant. So the source of the funds are the federal government. The type of financial aid is that gift type. It's the best kind of funds to have. It's a grant. It does not need to be repaid. The annual maximum for this current year, and it changes every year, the annual maximum is $6,895. So that's the most that a student could receive in this academic year. And the eligibility criteria attached to that fund is something called your EFC, or Estimated Family Contribution. That's a calculated figure based on the data you're providing on the financial aid application. It represents theoretically what a family can contribute toward their son or daughter's educational expenses in that year. So that calculated family contribution, and I'm going to talk more about that further on in the presentation, but that estimated family contribution figure has to be less than 6,206 in order for the students to get any federal Pell Grant. So in order to get the maximum federal Pell Grant, your family contribution would have to be calculated to be 0. And then it's prorated based on your family contribution. The highest is 6,895 though. You have to be, for federal aid, you have to be a US citizen or permanent resident to qualify. In addition to the federal Pell Grant, New York State, if you are a New York State resident and you're attending a New York State college, you can be considered for the New York State grant, which is called TAP. That stands for the Tuition Assistance Program. It's a grant, so it's the best kind of financial aid to get. It's gift aid. This year, the maximum is $5,565. And this award is based on your New York net taxable income, which is basically your federal adjusted gross income, less deductions and exemptions. So that income amount has to be less than $80,000 for you to get any TAP award. The minimum TAP award is $500 for the year. In order to get the maximum federal TAP award, you'd have to have a New York net taxable income of $7,000 or less. Folks who get that $500 TAP, the range of income is between $50,000 and $80,000 in your New York net taxable income. So if your income somewhere in there, the amount you'd qualify for in TAP if you're attending a New York State college would be $500 for the year. Then there are federal student loans, which I mentioned, that type of financial aid. There's a subsidized federal student loan. So the source of the funds is the federal government. The student is the borrower of these loans. The maximum for a first-year student is $3,500, and it's based on something called need, and the student has to be enrolled at least half-time. So financial need is actually another calculation, which I'll explain in a few minutes about how it is we determine need and what that is. But the student has to demonstrate need in order to qualify for the subsidized type of student loan. Subsidized simply means that the government is subsidizing the interest on that loan while the student's enrolled and for 6 months after they graduate or leave school. So no interest is accruing on the subsidized type of student loan because the interest is subsidized by the government if the student demonstrates financial need for that kind of loan. In addition to that subsidized student loan, the government also makes available an unsubsidized type of student loan. So it's an additional $2,000. The funds are also from the federal government. There is no need criteria associated with the unsubsidized student loan. The student simply has to be enrolled at least half-time and qualify for federal student aid, generally speaking. The interest rates on those student loans are fixed. They're a fixed rate. The rates are set around May of each year. Currently, they are around 4%. They've been rising generally like interest rates have been, but then they are set for the lifetime of the loan. So they are a fixed rate loan. It's just that the rate isn't fixed until May of the prior academic year. In addition to those two student loans, there's also a federal parent loan. So the federal parent loan allows parents to borrow on behalf of their student to help the son or daughter with their educational expenses. There's no need criteria with this parent loan, the parent loan for undergraduate students, but the parent who's borrowing must have a clear credit history. So the government's going to be looking at not your credit score and not your debt to income ratio, but they're going to be looking at your credit history. They'll do a credit check. They're looking for things like recent bankruptcies. If you're approved, then you can borrow up to COA, which stands for the cost of attendance at that college the student's attending. So costs vary from college to college, and that's why it's not a set amount. It's based on the college's cost. The interest rate on the parent loan is also fixed, but it's higher. It's around 8% right now. There is the credit check. And if the parent is denied the parent loan based on credit, then the government allows the financial aid officer to increase the unsubsidized type of student loan by $4,000 for first-year students. So either way, either through the federal parent loan or through an increase in the unsubsidized student loan, there's an additional $4,000 available there. The interest is accruing on both the federal parent loan and the unsubsidized type of student loan while the student's enrolled in college, though no payment needs to be made on either type of those loans. So you can postpone making payments, or you can choose to make interest-only payments, or you can start repaying both principal and interest. That's an option for you as you complete the paperwork to borrow those loans. And finally, the federal government also makes some funds available to colleges to partially fund a work-study program where the student, as I said earlier, just works a part-time job on campus. Part of the funds that they earn are from the federal government, intended for students who demonstrate need. This fund alone really is a lump sum of money that the federal government gives the college. And so colleges have a limited amount of those funds, and essentially for the other awards above that work study line, there's no limits really. So there's some urgency around applying for financial aid, because you don't want to lose out on funds like being able to be awarded work study because your application is late and the college has already awarded all the funds they have for that work study program. So just something to keep in mind as you're figuring out when to apply for financial aid. Earlier is always better. Again, you don't have to memorize this. This is the financial aid administrator's job to know these rules and regulations and apply them to your financial aid application and then advise you of eligibility. So how do you get access to those funds? You need to complete at least one financial aid application. The main financial aid application for federal and state funds is the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. The URL is here. We are going to email out a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, so you'll have the URLs that are listed throughout, so you don't have to worry about scrambling to make sure you get them written down accurately. So the free application for federal student aid is just what it says. It's a free online application. It collects data that's then provided to the colleges you list on the form, and then the financial aid office reviews your financial aid application and figures out what you qualify for. In addition to the FAFSA, if you're a New York State resident and applying to at least one New York State college, you want to also complete the New York State TAP, Tuition Assistance Program grant application. If you list at least one New York State college on the FAFSA as you're filing it, then at the end, once you've submitted the FAFSA, there'll be a pop-up that says, do you want to continue on to complete your New York State TAP grant application? And of course, you should say yes. But if you don't, or if you don't get that link, here's the URL where you can go directly to the New York State government website and complete an independent application, but you can't do it before your FAFSA is processed. So if you're doing a FAFSA and then you realize, oh, I missed that link, you have to wait a day or two for the FAFSA to process, and then you can complete that New York State TAP grant application. Finally, there's a CSS profile. This is very important for some colleges like Skidmore. We require the CSS profile in addition to other financial aid applications if you're going to be considered for federal and state aid. But we've required the CSS profile for Skidmore grant assistance. So it's very important. It's similar to the FAFSA, but it collects a lot more data and detail than what the FAFSA does. The college board administers this financial aid application. It's the same college board that administers the SATs. So your son or daughter or you may already have a college board account set up, and that's fine, that's great. And you'll use that same account to complete the CSS profile. So in terms of deadlines, October 1st of the student's senior year is when these financial aid applications become available again for the following academic year. So that's the earliest you can do it. You want to complete them sometime, around now in October, November, December, January of the student's senior year in high school. And then you would reapply each year because they're each an annual financial aid application. So your circumstances might change, and we want to collect that updated information every year. So now it's a deeper dive into the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. So it's just a standard form. It collects a lot of demographic information from the students and the parent. Things like, what's your name, what's your parent's name, what's your address, what's your date of birth, what are your parents' date of birth, what is your social security number, what is your parents' social security number, etc. So a lot of, very basic information that you'll have no trouble data entering. And it also collects financial information, as you would expect. So if the student earned income in the prior year, it's going to ask about how much income they earned, what were the taxes paid on that, what type of income was it, the same with the parent. And then it's going to ask you questions about assets. For financial aid purposes, assets are how much you have in the cash, savings, and checking accounts. If you have investments like stocks or bonds, or 529 college savings plans, those are all assets. If you own real estate, and ask questions about the equity in that. If you own a business and you employ more than 100 people, you need to report the equity in your business on the FAFSA. If you employ fewer than 100 people, you actually don't have to report the equity in your business. Of course, if you have business income that shows up on your personal tax return, you would be reporting that as part of your personal adjusted gross income. And then you list the colleges on there that you want to receive your data. And you can, I think currently you can list up to 9, but that's only temporary. So you can list your favorite 9, and then you can let it process, and then you can sign back into the FAFSA and add more colleges. So you can really list as many colleges on the FAFSA as you wish. It's available to be completed in both English and Spanish. And as I mentioned earlier, you file the form every year. So as a prospective student, you file the FAFSA. Once you're a first-year student, you file the FAFSA for your sophomore year. And then if you're going to a 4-year college, your junior year, and then again, your senior year. So every year you're completing a new FAFSA. The best way to start the first time you complete a FAFSA is to complete or create what's called an FSA, Federal Student Aid ID. This allows you to have this initially set up. It means that when you start the FAFSA, you can start it by using your FSA ID, and it'll pull some information in that you've already created, already entered, like your name, your social security number, your date of birth, etc. Those things you have to enter to create your FSA user ID. And so it's already there. And so when you go in to then create your FAFSA for the first time, if you use the student FSA ID, it'll pre-populate some of the FAFSA for you. It'll also ensure accuracy. So it's a good idea to do it in this order. First, create the FSA user ID account. Both the student and one parent for dependent students have to create an FSA user ID. And that's basically how you're signing or confirming that, yes, the data on this FAFSA, both the parent and the student are confirming is accurate and true. The student is going to use the FSA user ID for things in the future as well, to log back into a FAFSA to add a college. If they decide to borrow a student loan, they need to create or complete a master promissory note, so where they promise to repay the loan, and they're going to use their FSA user ID for that as well. If the parent borrows a federal parent loan, same thing, they're going to use their FSA user ID to sign that promissory note for the federal parent loan. So it's important to, obviously safeguard it, keep track, and use it for these important purposes. This is a screenshot of what the FAFSA homepage looks like. So you can go to fafsa.ed.gov. You'll see this. You'll look at the first time you ever do this. You'll look at new to the FAFSA process. How do you complete the form? Start here. You'll click on that. The button below that where it says log in, that's once you've created a FAFSA. Let's say you realize you made a mistake on your FAFSA. You can correct mistakes by logging back into the FAFSA, and you can add additional college codes by logging back into the FAFSA once you've created it. As I mentioned, it's best to use that FSA ID to start your FAFSA. You can, read through this, but it'll just help it be more accurate. You want to make sure whatever name is on your Social Security card is the name you're using when you create your FSA ID. So, for example, if, Michael Smith is on the Social Security card, you don't want to create your FSA user ID or FAFSA saying Mike Smith, because it won't match. And then you'll have, it'll slow you down and create some challenges for you, because it'll show that the Social Security Administration does not agree with the name and Social Security number you've indicated on the FSA user ID and FAFSA. So you want to make sure that the names match exactly. Parents, if you are remarried or married and you have not changed your name with the Social Security Administration, you should either do that right away or use whatever name the Social Security Administration has for you when you're completing the FAFSA and FSA ID. There's something listed in here talking about an IRS data retrieval tool, which I will talk more at length about. But this allows for making sure you use your FSA user ID to begin your FAFSA. Allows for easier processing when you're pulling in data from the IRS to populate your FAFSA. So that's just another reason to do it. And then finally, you want to make sure that you don't start the FAFSA using the parent's FSA ID, because otherwise it's going to look like the parent is requesting financial aid on their own FAFSA. Just think of it this way. It's the student's FAFSA on which parental information is provided. And that'll help you, think about the questions in the right way. When it says, what's your name? It means what's the student's name, because it's their financial aid application. This is just a screenshot of the PDF of the 23-24 FAFSA. So you can go to this URL, you can print out a copy of the PDF, which is not a bad idea before you get started completing a FAFSA. You can take a look at the questions that will be asked. You can gather your data together to make sure you can answer those questions. And there's also explanations and instructions on this PDF that can help you get through maybe some more thorny questions before you log on. And then when you log on and create that FAFSA, you'll be able to go through it much more quickly, and you won't be surprised because you'll have reviewed all the kinds of questions that it's asking you. There's nothing particularly complicated on there usually. Sometimes when parents are divorced or separated, it can be a little tricky. But the criteria is that the parent with whom the student lived with most in the prior 12 months to completing the form is the parent whose data goes on both the FAFSA and the profile. If that parent is remarried, that parent's current spouse's information also has to go on the FAFSA and the profile. So it talks a little bit about that in the instructions on this form. And so you might want to take a look at that if you have something you're kind of curious or wondering or even worried about. It'll probably be explained there because it's not an uncommon situation. So the IRS data retrieval tool is maybe the most complicated thing on the FAFSA, because otherwise it's really demographic information: name, address, social security number, date of birth, parents' information, high school, what high school did you go to? It'll ask questions about your dependency. Are you a graduate student? Are you a veteran? Are you a ward of the court? Do you have dependents? Those kind of still demographic information. And then it'll get into the income questions. And for the income questions, if you've completed a tax return in the prior year, the most accurate thing to do is to use that information that's at the IRS for you to populate the FAFSA. And so there's this tool that the FAFSA processor developed to pull in your income data from the IRS and populate it into the FAFSA. And that's called the IRS data retrieval tool. It's retrieving data from the IRS and putting it into the FAFSA for you. It's really great if you can actually use the data retrieval tool. Because about 30% of FAFSAs are required to go through additional verification steps at the college once the student enrolls. And the college will then end up collecting copies of your tax return and maybe W-2s if you haven't successfully used this IRS data retrieval tool. So doing it, successfully using it, means your data is accurate, and also means you probably won't have to go through extra steps with the college down the road. So, I mean, it's easy. It's pretty easy. It's just a little more data that you have to complete in order for the IRS to verify you are who you say you are. So when you're completing the FAFSA, you'll answer the questions in the student and parent sections. It'll look something like this. Hopefully it's a little clearer on your screen, but you can see at the top there, check marks as you go through completing the FAFSA online. It's student demographics will be complete. School section, you'll list all the colleges you want to receive the information and whether you're going to live on or off campus, complete. Dependency status, those questions about veteran or graduate student, or do you have dependents, answered. And then you get to the student financials. It's going to start asking about your income information. And so it says, hey, you're at this section. It looks like, do you want to try using the IRS DRT, data retrieval tool? And you'll say yes. And if you answer the student's financial questions that says, did you file a tax return? In this example, in 2021, if you say no, it's not going to take you to this form because there's logic in the online application. But if you say, yes, I did file a tax return and it was a 1040, and it'll take you and it'll say, okay, looks like you could qualify to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Do you want to? And you'll say, yes, there's no reason to say no. Yes, please proceed to the IRS. And then once you're here, it's going to ask you to enter, again, more information about yourself, like your name and your address, what kind of tax return you filed. And this is so it can use this particular form to match you in the IRS system. So re-enter your Social Security number, all of the information it's asking for, press the submit button. Then it says, okay, we found you in the IRS. It gives you another opportunity. Do you want to transfer your data? Of course you do, or you wouldn't have just done that, but you've got to check, yes, please transfer my data. You do that. And then if it works successfully, and there's no reason it wouldn't at that point, it'll come back with another pop-up that says you've successfully transferred your data. So you'll know that it was successful because you'll get this screen that tells you it was successful. It'll also, instead of entering a number in the box that says, what was your adjusted gross income for 2021 in this example, it'll simply say transferred from the IRS. And it puts those words in there rather than a dollar amount for your security and privacy. So you don't get to see what it says, but it's whatever was on your tax return. Once you do it for the student, then you'll do the same kind of exercise for the parent to get the parent data transferred over. And then not only, like I said, is it accurate, but you'll avoid some potentially, kind of pain in the neck, extra submission of paperwork to whatever college the student's attending in the future. So that's the overview of the FAFSA. They've really streamlined it. If you can make it through the IRS data retrieval, your data will be good for your income. It'll ask you a few short questions about your assets. If you print out the PDF, you'll be able to review those ahead of time and see the instructions for what you're supposed to include and exclude. It's not an overwhelmingly difficult process anymore. And you'll see at the end of this presentation, you have my contact information, and I'm happy to take questions as you complete the forms about anything you have about, like, I don't understand this, or I had this problem, and I'll try to help you through it, whether or not you apply to Skidmore. So the big one for Skidmore, though, is the CSS profile for international and domestic students. This is the form we need in order to determine your eligibility for our grant assistance. Why, such fun to fill out financial aid applications, we know. Why do we want a second one in addition to the FAFSA? It's because it collects a lot more information. For example, the value of your home, the debt on your home, those are not reported on the FAFSA. They are on the CSS profile. You can tell us about medical expenses. We want to know if there's a sibling attending college, where are they attending, how much are you contributing toward their education, what year are they in, etc. There's also a free form section where you can write notes and explain special circumstances that the financial aid office will review when we get that information from you. So we require this, very important. If we just get the FAFSA, we can't determine your eligibility for Skidmore grant. So there are many colleges, a couple hundred out of the roughly 3,000 colleges in the United States that require the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA. Some of those colleges, like Skidmore, also require that the non-custodial parent, the parent with whom the student does not live, also complete the CSS profile. So both parents, in the case where parents are separated or divorced, will be completing the CSS profile independently with the student's information, have that sent to Skidmore, and we don't combine your data, but we attach that to the student's record so that we can review what both parents have available to assist the student with their educational expenses. This is the homepage of the CSS profile that, again, is administered by the College Board. You'll see 2 years that are listed there. You want to make sure you're completing the right year financial aid application. So for next year, that would be the 23-24 academic year, and that's the one you should click. So if you're wondering which colleges require the CSS profile, there's a button right on the homepage, and the big arrow on the screen is pointing to that button. And it says you can check participating schools and scholarships. If you click on that, it brings you to this form here. And let me just tell you a little about the form. So it lists the name, the institution name of the college or university. The next field over is the state where the college is. The next one is saying, does that college require the CSS profile of its domestic students? And it'll say yes or no. At Skidmore, it's yes. The next column over is, does that college require the CSS profile for international students? Yes or no. At Skidmore, it's yes. The next column over is, does the college require the CSS profile be completed by non-custodial parents? Yes or no. Skidmore is yes. And the final column is referring to IDOC, which is a document imaging system. It's a, something that the College Board offers colleges, obviously for a fee. And some colleges participate in IDOC and some don't. Skidmore does not. So anything you were to send to Skidmore, like a special circumstances maybe, or tax returns or whatever we are requiring or you're deciding to submit, would have to come directly to the financial aid office, not through this IDOC. But some colleges do participate in the document imaging service that the College Board offers. So some common application errors and tips. It's the student's application on which parental information is provided. So when it says your marital status, even though parents often are helping students complete the forms, and we appreciate that. And, they're at the computer and they're trying to get this done, your marital status. They're thinking, oh, my son's in high school. They're not married. That marital status must be talking about me, the parent. It's not. It's talking about the student. All sorts of students are going to college, graduate students, it's non-traditional students. So whenever it says you or your, it means the student. Database matches occur once you submit the FAFSA. So Homeland Security is checking for the citizenship status of the student to ensure they're eligible for federal student aid. And the Social Security Administration is comparing the name that you're submitting attached to a Social Security number to make sure that that's valid. Divorced, separated, remarried families, again, I've just written this out here, use the parents' information the student lived with in the prior 12 months. So that is the parent who has to provide their information on the FAFSA and on the profile. If they are remarried, that parent's current spouse's information also must be provided on the FAFSA and on the profile. And at Skidmore, the other parent, the non-custodial parent, has to complete a separate profile and submit that information to us as well. In terms of assets, some tips here. If you have funds in qualified retirement plans, you do not report them anywhere on the FAFSA. So don't put down your 401k or IRAs. The value of those assets and retirement plans are not anywhere on the FAFSA. On the profile, they're only in very specific spots that are asking about your retirement plans. But let me reassure you, they're not part of the calculation to determine eligibility. They give the financial aid administrator a fuller picture of your situation, but it's not used in the calculation. Regarding your home, so your primary residence is not reported on the FAFSA. It is, though, asked about on the profile, so you would be reporting it there. Business, I mentioned earlier, if you employ fewer than 100 employees, you don't have to report that on the FAFSA, but you do have to report that on the CSS profile. 529 college savings plans. They are assets and they are reported as the parent's asset, not the student's asset, even if it's in the student's name. So if the parent has a 529 plan or the student has a 529 plan, you always put that on the parent side when it's asking about the parent assets. This results in a more favorable calculation for your eligibility, so you want to make sure that you get that right. If a grandparent owns a 529 plan, that asset is not reported on the FAFSA, just if the parent or the student owns the 529 plan. UGMA and UTMA accounts are, if you don't know what they are, then you wouldn't have one, so don't worry about it. But if you do, those are reported and must be reported as the student's asset. On to financial need and awards. So how do people like me in the financial aid office determine what your need for financial aid is, and then your eligibility for all those federal, state, and significantly institutional financial aid awards? We use this basic calculation. We take our cost of attendance at our college, we deduct your calculated family contribution, what your family can theoretically afford to contribute toward your son or daughter's education in 1 year. The difference between the cost of our college and your family contribution is your financial need at any one college. A little bit more about that family contribution, or EFC. As I said, it's a calculated figure. It's based on these factors primarily. How many people are in the household? How many of those are enrolled in college at the same time? What the parent income is, what the student income is, what the parent assets are, and what the student's assets are. All of those pieces of data are put through a formula to determine this family contribution that we plug into the middle of this little calculation to determine your financial need. Here's a more concrete example of how that plays out, how that works. So let's say we have a family size of 4. There's one student enrolled in college, and the income of the family is around $75,000 annually. And let's say this one student with this set of circumstances applies to 3 kinds of colleges: a 4-year public college, a 4-year private college, and then a community college. You can see the college price tag really varies from institution to institution. No surprise, probably, to you about that. So maybe in New York State, a 4-year public for someone living on campus would be just under $20,000. A 4-year private for someone living on campus would be $60,000. And someone that's commuting to a community college, full-time tuition might be about $3,500. The calculated family contribution for a family size of 4, one in college, and income around $75,000. Let's say that's $9,000. It's actually a little less than that, but for this example, let's use $9,000. And so you can see the financial need really varies as well because the college price tag varies so much. So at a 4-year public, in this example, the financial need would be $10,500. At a 4-year private that costs $60,000, the financial need is much greater because the cost of attendance is much greater. And that at a community college, the student would not demonstrate any financial need. And remember from that first chart of awards, financial need plays a big part in qualifying and eligibility for different types of financial aid. So need really varies from one college to the next based on the cost of attendance. Award eligibility is often tied to financial need. At Skidmore, I'm just going to back up a minute. We have a policy that we promise to meet the demonstrated financial need of all of our students who are admitted and apply for financial aid on time. So if we determine your need to be $51,000, then we will provide $51,000 in financial aid if you are admitted and you've completed and submitted your financial aid application on time. Skidmore's costs are higher than that now. We're above 80,000. So that would mean that your financial need in this situation would be 71,000, and we would provide that much in financial aid. A modest amount of student loan, that 3,500 in student loan. Work study at Skidmore is about 2,600, and the rest would be grant assistance. So we do a great job of supporting our students who are admitted and qualify for financial aid to be able to allow them to enroll if they want to enroll, and then persist over the 4 years here. We meet need every year, not just the first year. And even if financial circumstances change, like someone loses a job or a sibling ends up attending college, when the student is a junior or senior here and your need goes up because now you've got 2 in college, we will continue to meet your need each year as long as you reapply on time. And that's not just because we're a private school, that's because that's what our policy is. And that's what our commitment to access is. There are other private schools that are wonderful schools. They just don't have the kind of financial strength that Skidmore has and aren't able to meet your demonstrated need. So maybe they'll calculate your need to be 51,000, but they can only afford to offer you 41,000 or 20,000 or nothing or whatever it is that they can do. And that's just something to be prepared for if you're applying to different colleges. The same at a 4-year public. So they may determine your need to be 10,500, but they may not have any or enough resources to be able to meet your need. They may offer you 0 grant assistance. There's no rule or law or regulation that says once a college determines the student's demonstrated need that they must provide resources in that amount. So it can not just your need vary, but the results, the financial aid that you're awarded may vary as well, depending upon the policies of the college. So award eligibility is often tied to financial need, but there's no requirement that it meets your financial need. So Skidmore, as I said, awards our grant assistance based on need. We promise to do that every year as long as you apply on time every year. And I mentioned, and merit is another type of grant or scholarship. This presentation is focused on the need-based aid because that's why you file the FAFSA. That's why you file the profile, so we can determine your need. But there are other reasons that a student can be awarded a grant or scholarship. It could be based on a standardized test or grade point average, etc. At Skidmore, it's all about the family's demonstrated need. Financial aid awards are usually sent with the admissions decision, can be online these days or in the mail. At Skidmore, it's both. If you're admitted to Skidmore, you'll get an envelope in the mail, and you'll also be able to view the admission notice and financial aid award letter online in our portal. If you're accepted to more than one college, you want to make sure that you review financial aid awards, compare them, and then let the college know. So if a college has admitted you, they want to know, are you coming? If you've decided to go to another college, that's great. There's a place for everybody. But let the colleges that did admit you know that you're not attending, so that it helps everyone. So if there's someone on the wait list that is waiting to find out, and we're not sure if we have space, it's great and just really helpful and polite if you let the college know your decision either way, whether you're going to attend or not. But make sure you compare the financial aid offers and understand some of the policies around financial aid at the colleges. What if my need increases? What if my parent loses a job? Will you be able to increase my financial aid over the years if something changes? Is a good question to ask. Let's say you're admitted to a college and you get your financial aid decision, and it's all good, but you're just not sure. You don't think that maybe you can afford to attend. You can always appeal the financial aid decision, That's kind of what it's called in the business. It just means asking for more money or asking for reevaluation, more consideration. And we call it a financial aid appeal. You're appealing for more funds. All you need to do is contact the financial aid office. It's just staffed with people like me. We expect to hear from families, some families anyway, after we send out our admissions and financial aid decisions. If we've admitted you, we want you to come to our college. If you can't afford it based on what we put together, it never hurts to ask for more help. The worst that's going to happen is that the financial aid office will say, I'm sorry, we've looked at everything based on our policies and your situation. We can't offer any more. But if there's something going on and we want to look at, your projected income rather than your prior income, or you've got a sibling in, private school in 10th grade, and you want us to take into consideration some of those expenses, there might be areas where we can reevaluate, and it doesn't hurt to ask, right? So the important thing is that you open up that dialogue with the financial aid office in email, in person, over the phone, whatever works for you. So I hope that overview was helpful to you all. You are free to contact me. You've got my email address there, our phone number in the financial aid office. We're happy to help families through this process. We know it can feel overwhelming, and we've been doing this for a long time in the financial aid office, and we've probably heard every question or concern or situation. So you probably won't surprise us, and we might be able to quickly help you if you have any questions. So thanks so much for your attention. Let's see if I can navigate this well. Okay, so the first question: if I don't qualify for federal work study, can I still get a job on campus? And the answer to this is yes. At Skidmore, even if you're not awarded work study, any student can work on campus in a part-time job. So for our first year students, their jobs are basically guaranteed. They may not be the most glamorous jobs, but if you want to work on campus at Skidmore, you can. And the first year students work in dining services, which could be in the kitchen. It could be wiping down tables. It could be swiping students into the dining hall. It could be working in our on-campus Starbucks. So at Skidmore, any student, as I said, can work on campus. After the first year, there are all sorts of jobs available and open to students, ranging from clerical work in the administrative departments to helping professors in their offices, doing research, working in the gym or the library, in the admissions office. All sorts of jobs are available at Skidmore. And that answer can be different for every college. At some colleges, unless you're awarded work study, you won't be able to work on campus. The second question: is our financial aid locked in for all 4 years at year one, or does it change every year? So the answer to this is I'm going to be reassuring. So it's not locked in because you have to reapply, and it's based on need. The only reason it would decrease, though, is if your financial situation, made some significant improvement. So let's say you have two parents, one had been working, now both parents are working, the income goes up. Yep, you've got more resources than you did originally. You probably don't need as much grant assistance than we originally offered, so the eligibility could decrease. Barring that kind of thing, if your financial situation is remaining similar, you reapply each year, your financial aid is going to be similar each year. Because at Skidmore, we're going to determine your eligibility the same way we did the first year. We're not going to do some kind of strange, different calculation for you. We're going to do it exactly the same way we did it the first year, so you can rely on that. And if something worsens in your financial situation, someone loses a job, your financial aid can increase, and we'll see that when you complete the new financial aid application. So for most students, it remains similar or the same. For some, it decreases. For some, for a small number, it decreases, and for some, it increases because of changes in the family situation. Next question, is Skidmore financial aid reduced for those applying regular decision? So I think the question is, would you get a different financial aid award if you're applying early decision than if you're applying regular decision? And the answer is no, it'll be exactly the same. We determine need the same way, regardless of how you apply for early decision, regular decision, early decision round 1, round 2, or regular. So there's no problem, no reduction in eligibility just because you're applying to Skidmore in a different way through regular decision or early decision. In fact, there's a slight advantage to applying early decision in financial aid because we do have limited resources. We don't have an, wide open, unlimited financial aid budget. And so the early decision rounds are earlier in the process. And so we still have flexibility early in the process. But when we get to regular decision, we send out all those decisions at the same time. And now we're pretty locked down on our budget. So there is some, sometimes some additional flexibility for the early decision students, just because it's earlier in the process. Next question, can you still use the IRS data retrieval tool if you as a parent have filed taxes, but the student who is applying for college did not make enough money to work this year to file taxes? That's a great question. So the answer is yes. The questions about the IRS data retrieval are different for the student. So they're separate for the student and then separate for the parent. So when the student says initially, no, I did not file taxes, it's not going to be, they are not going to be offered at that period in the process the option to use the IRS data retrieval. They'll complete the income questions, the asset questions, it'll move on to the parent questions about income, and then you'll have the opportunity to use the IRS data retrieval for the parent's data. So the answer is yep, you can still do it for the parent even if the student doesn't file. Next question, where is the best place to submit additional financial aid information, such as a non-custodial parent profile? So for additional information that you want to tell the financial aid office about, you can put that on the profile in the special circumstances question. You can also email the financial aid office. Our email is finaid, FINAID @skidmore.edu. So you can email us something specific. You can call and talk to us. A non-custodial parent profile is a separate financial aid application, though. So the custodial parent will complete the profile and put their information and the student's information. The non-custodial parent will put their information on the non-custodial profile, list Skidmore, indicate the student's demographics, and then that data file will be processed and sent by the college board to the college listed on there. So it's not something that the custodial parent sends to us. It's something that non-custodial parent does independently, and then we receive that data. Next, how do need blind or need aware policies work, and how does it apply to Skidmore? That's a great question. It's a little complicated, and I'm happy to address it. So in our admissions process, in any admissions process, it can be a process that is blind to the demonstrated financial need of the family or aware of the demonstrated financial need of the family. At Skidmore, the admissions office can be aware of the demonstrated financial need of the family. So Skidmore is a need-aware admissions office or need-sensitive admissions office. So to give you a bigger picture explanation of that, every college has a financial aid budget, an amount of financial aid they intend to award to families to help those, usually at Skidmore anyway, those who can't afford it to be able to attend. And while that budget is millions of dollars at Skidmore, it's not unlimited. So we have to manage that in some way. And every college has a budget that it has to manage in some way. At Skidmore, we do that kind of through the admissions process. So the admissions office will be doing their job, reading applications, internally going through the admissions process. You know, this is the group we'd like to admit. And then they'll reach out to financial aid and we'll say, well, if we admitted these students we're interested in, will we come in on budget, or will we be over budget, or will we be under budget? What is it looking like? And so we do those analysis. And if it looks like we're going to be over budget, we might have to change some of those admissions decisions because we can't afford to be over budget. We have to be on budget. So that's how the need of, in a group on the whole can affect some admissions decisions at Skidmore. Most, as I said, all colleges have a budget. There's just a small handful of colleges whose endowments are in the billions that it really is probably very less important if they're on budget or not with their financial aid awards. Those colleges can afford to be need blind. They say, regardless of the cost of those students we want to admit, we're just going to go ahead and admit them. We don't even know what it's going to cost. We're just going to admit whomever we want, and it'll be what it is. Very, very literally small, tiny list of colleges that can afford to do that. It's something we all aspire to be. That would be wonderful, but you've got to have so much an endowment to be able to afford to do that and stay in business. So then the next best thing, as we see it, is to be need aware. So we meet the need of all of our students who apply on time and are admitted, which we feel so strongly about. And there are a larger number of colleges, but not a huge number of colleges who manage things that way. And then there's the rest of the colleges who say, we're going to be need blind. So we're going to admit who we want to admit, but we're going to manage our budget by not fully meeting the need of all or most of our students. So we have X number of dollars. We're going to spread it out among everyone who we want to admit, maybe regardless even of their financial need. And that's how we're going to stay on budget. Admit who we want, and then we'll just, yes, we know your need is $30,000, but here's a $10,000 presidential scholarship. We want you to come anyway. That's the other way to do it. So if you're going to be need blind, you might end up gapping. So that's called gapping. When you determine a financial need to be a certain amount, but you don't award enough financial aid to meet that need, there's a gap. Those students then can end up borrowing. Those families borrow a lot more in student loans to be able to afford to send their son or daughter or themselves to college. And that's where you get into some tough times in repayment, student loan indebtedness, defaults. When a student stretches financially to attend a college, they really can't afford to and end up borrowing too much. So that's a long explanation, but that is the difference between need aware and need blind, and how that all works. Next question. Hello, is the family contribution based on the FAFSA calculation or based on the college's calculation? So at Skidmore, two answers for that. To determine Skidmore grant eligibility, it's based on the College Board's calculation of family contribution, because it takes into consideration things like home equity and potentially your business equity, which the FAFSA doesn't even collect. The FAFSA collects certain information, and there's also a federal calculation of the family contribution, which must be used to determine federal financial aid eligibility. So the answer is both. The federal calculation is used for federal financial aid eligibility, and the College Board calculation is used for Skidmore grant eligibility. And I would say 65% of the time, maybe 70% of the time, the College Board calculation is more favorable to the family than the federal calculation. And we also feel like it's more realistic, which is why we use it. Next question, does Skidmore offer grants, or is it a combination of grant, work study, and loans? For international students, it's only grants and work study. There are no loans in a financial aid package for international students. They can't borrow, they can't take advantage of federal student aid, and they can't borrow loans in the United States. So it's grant and work study. Otherwise, it's a combination of, we determine need, as I talked about earlier, then we offer the student to meet toward meeting that need up to $3,500 in the federal student loan. Then we offer up to, or usually $2,600 in work study, And the rest of the need that we calculate is then offered in grants. It could be federal, state, and institutional, some combination of grants, but whatever the remaining need is in grant. That might be our last question. Oh, one more, maybe one more question. Do international students have a lower chance of receiving financial aid? No, we meet the need of all our admitted students, whether you're international or domestic, but there's more competition among international students for a spot in admission if financial aid is required. And that's because often the amount of grant that an international student needs is very high because international students don't qualify for federal grants or state grants or federal loans. So as I said, the competition for the spots that we have for international students is very great. But if you're admitted, you receive, you know, whatever your need is in financial aid. Well, I hope that's been a helpful presentation for everybody. We will send out a copy of the PowerPoint. You've got my contact information if you have any questions. I appreciate so much your time and attention tonight. And as I said, I hope it's helpful, and I wish you all the best of luck for your journey in this admission and financial aid process. Have a great evening.